Sorry, I put a message into Tim Haney. Okay, anyone, it's open to anyone to make a nomination, please.
This is Ed Whitmore. What about Kayla?
Kayla McCord as vice chair. Anyone to second it? I'll second it. Any discussion? No discussion? Okay, all in favor of Kayla, do a verbal vote. That seems to work really well. Ed?
Kayla for.
I'm voting yes. Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay, Kayla, do you want to vote?
Sure, that'll be fine.
Okay, so Kayla is now our vice chair. We now open the floor for nominations for the secretary for the year 2021-22. Let's open it up. Anybody? Stephanie, you want to nominate anyone?
I can second.
You can second, but you don't have any. Okay. Kayla, you want to nominate somebody for for secretary?
Yes, this is Kayla McCord. I would nominate Ed Whitmore if he's willing to serve.
I second the motion. Therefore, there is a motion made to nominate Ed Whitmore as secretary of the ZBA. I seconded it. Verbally, give your vote. Ed?
Okay.
Okay. John Marlar, yes. Kayla?
Yes,
Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay. Now we're to item C, discussion and possible action to approve meeting time, date, and place for our next year. Personally, I think I'm happy with where it's at. Anybody else? Anybody want to make a motion or add anything to that?
I'd second it.
Anybody? Okay, let's vote on that. We'll keep the current schedule as it's currently set for, what is it, Andrina? It's for the, is it a specific Tuesday of the month?
That is correct, sir. Historically, the regular meeting for the Zoning Board of Adjustment has always been the third Tuesday of every month at 5 o'clock in the afternoon at the council chambers.
Right. Preferably next month. Okay. All in favor, give us your vote. Ed?
Yes.
John Marlar, yes. Kayla?
yes,
And Stephanie?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
Considering,
excuse me, Chair Marlar, who made the motion? I'm sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, I thought that I did. Okay, I make
Okay,
a motion that we approve the current schedule of the third Tuesday of the month to be at 5 o'clock and hopefully in the council chambers from here on out, hopefully, but that's the motion. It was seconded by Ed and we just voted on it and it was unanimous.
thank you, sir.
Okay,
Sorry.
now this is turned over to the planning department for item D, consideration, possible action to confirm the bylaws for the zoning board of adjustment. I hope all of you have read them. It is important for you to know what your rights on this board are, what our charter gives us the right to do. We are the only legislative panel that the city has that our decisions are final in the sense that the only recourse somebody has is to go to court. And it's important that we recognize our responsibilities on this board as citizen representatives. We're not here to be a rubber stamp for city staff or the petitioner. We're here to look at the scope of what's being presented to us in the scope of the city in general. And it's important for you to understand you have certain rights that you can do. You can submit an item for an agenda meeting. All the items are allowed here and so forth. So it's a relatively easy document. It's not like some of the corporations the city has, but keep in mind that you are a unique panel. And as a unique panel, think of yourself as citizen representatives for the entire city. And that's my admonition. I'll turn it over to Planning Director to handle this item D. Andrina?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So actually, Sherman, thank you so much for going through explaining it pretty much. But I think that the big items to really be able to be mindful in terms of the bylaws is, as I mentioned, it does provide guidance and standards in terms of like who the officers are, how they're nominated, attendance. Our attendance policy is very important for you to be able to attend every Board of Adjustment meeting, particularly when a quorum is definitely very important. I know that this board doesn't meet as often, but when we do meet, it is important for us to not just meet a quorum, but to be able to have that 3/4 vote, because in order to be able to grant a variance or a special exception, that supermajority, that 3/4 vote, 75% vote is definitely needed and required. So by our state law. But yes, it talks about, how the open meetings are conducted, and, just the formations and so forth. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. But these are the bylaws that have been adopted by the city council. And what we are asked to do is that every year when a new term begins, is that all the members of the board basically take action accepting the bylaws, affirming to the bylaws that yes, they will be abiding by them.
So that's pretty much item D. We're ready to move into our legislative agenda.
Chairman Marler, if I may, we do need the Board of Adjustment to take action on accepting, affirming the bylaws. And so we would need somebody to make a motion to essentially confirm the bylaws and in the second in the vote.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we confirm the bylaws as presented in our agenda as written.
I would second that.
Ed seconds. Any discussion? No discussion being submitted. Let's go for a vote. Ed?
Yes.
John Marler, yes. Kayla?
Yes.
Stephanie?
Yep.
Okay. Don't get in a wreck, Stephanie. Okay, item G, this is a zoning variance, and who is going to handle that? Ethan?
That would be me, yes, sir.
Okay.
Chairman, if I may, I believe we may have skipped over item F, which is consideration and possible action on the minutes.
Right. Item F is the minutes of our last meeting. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes as written, or are there any discussion?
I move that we accept the minutes as written from last meeting.
And do I hear a second?
Kayla McCord, I second.
Okay. Any discussion on the minutes? I didn't see any. Okay, none being noticed, we will have a vote. Ed, accepting the minutes as written.
Yes.
John Marler, yes. Kayla?
Yes.
And Stephanie?
Without accident, yes.
Okay, now we're back to item G, and I'm sorry, go ahead and explain what item G consists of. And boy, there's a lot in this one, guys, so pay attention here. Ethan, it's all yours. We got our screen shared, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot to this request today, but I think there's a request to every zoning variance that we get to hear. Our agenda item tonight reads public hearing and possible action on a request for a zoning variance from UDC section 605.010C for a 11.5% increase from the 25% of the principal structure maximum size requirement for an accessory structure to allow an accessory structure that is 36.5% of the size of the principal structure for the property located at 500 Toledo Trail, bearing a legal description of Lot 22, Block 4, Serenata East, Unit 2. Essentially what is being requested tonight, and we'll dive into this a little bit further, is an increase in the size for a little guest cottage that this property owner would be allowed to have. Under our code, there are several limits for a, several limiting factors for the size of an accessory structure. One of them being the size is tied to the size of the principal structure, meaning the main house. So our code would say that the maximum size an accessory structure can be is 25% of the size of that main structure, which we will get into some more details about, of course. What the applicant is requesting tonight is an increase in that limit to allow his accessory structure, his guest cottage, to be 36.5% of the size of his main home. So the property we're talking about tonight is a single family lot in the Serenata subdivision, in the portion of the subdivision that is within the city limits. So back in the 1970s or 80s, I forget the exact date, the city extended a wastewater line through the center of the Serenata subdivision. And as such, a portion of the subdivision was annexed into the city limits so that they could take wastewater access from the city instead of remaining on septic tanks. If you're familiar with the location of the Georgetown Tennis Center, this property is right down the road from the tennis center. This is on the edge of the neighborhood. Mr. Schmidt's backyard opens up into the Georgetown Airport. When you look at the property, you can see just what I'm talking about with the house backing up to the airport. This is not used for any airport facilities at the moment. The runway runs north-south just to the right of this image. And you can see that Mr. Schmidt has a 2-story home with a side entry garage and driveway off of Arrow Drive where his home faces towards Toledo Trail. This sketch is provided by Mr. Schmidt to really outline what he would like to do with the property. You can see his existing home and driveway. You can see his setbacks, which are established by plat. They're not established by zoning. You can see his existing accessory structure, and you can see his proposed driveway and cottage tucked there at the back in the corner. This lot is approximately 0.35 acres in size, which translates to about 1,500 square feet. The size of his backyard alone is nearly a 1/4 acre, just under 10,000 square feet. The home is about 2,300 square feet in size, about just under 600 of that being a 2-car garage. And the proposed guest cottage that Mr. Schmidt is asking us to consider today is 646 square feet. These numbers do not include covered patios. Our development code does not include those as living area, so they aren't counted towards the gross square footage. The cottage Mr. Schmidt would construct would have a small living room, bedroom, bathroom, and kitchenette, and would be roughly about 10 feet tall, made of board and batten siding, much shorter than his existing primary structure home. So the definition of an accessory structure is on your screen, of course, but essentially you can think of it as any outbuilding, any other building on the property that is not directly connected to the principal structure, meaning the home, that is not used as a dwelling. Most of the time you see these as storage sheds, pool houses, detached garages, people, she sheds, hobby rooms. You see them used as all different types of things. And our code sets 3 limits, 3 boundaries that control how large they can be. The first is what we've discussed, 25% of the size of the main house. If your house includes an attached garage, our code is very specific about not including the garage as a part of that calculation, because we have separate provisions in the code for detached garages. If you were to have a 2-car detached garage, you could have up to 600 feet without having to follow the 25% requirement. Mostly because if you had an existing home, an older home that did not have an attached garage, probably a pre-World War II type home, you needed that 2-car garage to meet your off-street parking requirements, and you had an older homes are typically smaller, you would not get the size you need for your parking. So there's some exceptions there. The second limit is in regards to the size of the rear yard. So accessory structures cannot cover more than 30% of your rear yard. And your rear yard is a bit different than we think of a side yard. It is quite simply everything behind the back wall of the home. Sometimes we think of a backyard as the area you fence, and those are not always synonymous. In this case, they are pretty synonymous, but not always. And then lastly, you cannot exceed the impervious cover limit of your zoning district. Here in this case, it's determined that with the annexation many years ago, impervious cover limit here is 40%. Accessory structures, most accessory dwelling unit, you can get accessory structures and accessory dwelling units confused. Accessory structures are never attached to a home, but accessory dwelling units can be attached to a home or they cannot be attached to a home. So sometimes kind of as all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares, same situation here. An accessory dwelling unit is a separate space on the property designed for a second household to live. It has to have a full kitchen, living quarters, and sleeping quarters. And we define a kitchen as having a refrigerator, a sink, and a cooking appliance. So if you're missing one of those 3 things, you don't have a kitchen. And accessory dwelling units come with a whole list of other requirements regarding parking and how the ownership of the home and the accessory dwelling unit work. And they do share a lot of the same size requirements if they are an attached. They share a lot of the same requirements, but today we're not talking about an accessory dwelling unit. We're only talking about an accessory structure. So I just want that to be clear. So doing the math regarding the subject property, if you follow the strict 25% requirement, the applicant would be allowed roughly 455 square foot accessory structure, but with their request, they would be allowed a 664 square foot structure, exactly what they're asking for. This is a net increase of about 210 square feet in the accessory structure. So as staff reviewed the request, we of course reviewed it to the 7 approval criteria that we have to consider for a zoning variance. These criteria are really meant to get at the points on your screen. That this is something that won't be contrary to public interest, that there are special conditions that necessitate the need for the variance, that we are avoiding any unnecessary hardship by sticking to the rule book, that the intent and the spirit of the code is preserved, and then of course that substantial justice is done. That is why, as Mr. Marler said, you're a legislative body. So as we talk about these tonight, staff has provided our professional analysis of the case. So we have made a determination on our end and a recommendation to you as to whether we feel this complies with the approval criteria, as we'll discuss, partially complies with it, or does not comply with it at all. This is our staff analysis, our professional analysis as land use experts. As we talk through these tonight, do pay attention. If there's a motion made tonight to approve the request or deny the request, you have to make specific reference to these 7 things in that motion. So the first approval criteria is what we refer to as extraordinary conditions. Are there significant natural features, space constraints? Are they struggling to find room to meet other site requirements? Is there really just not enough space or room? Is there something about the property that prevents them from complying? And in this case, Staff was unable to find that there was. And the applicant very well could stay within the 25% limit just fine. There's no reason he needs to build larger. The second criteria that we found that the request complied with was no substantial detriment. And looking at other properties around the neighborhood and considering the size of the variance, this is not an unusually large structure. It's not an unusually tall structure. It's not something that you would not typically find in a backyard. So it poses no public health or safety hazard to adjacent properties. And also the subject property drains away from any other neighboring properties. And so we should not expect any issues with drainage or excess runoff. The third criteria is regards to, is the condition that creates the need for the variance applicable to other properties? You know, is there a natural feature that every other property in the neighborhood has to work around? Or is there is the way the neighborhood was just built many years ago the reason for the variance? And in this case, the reason for the variance mostly revolves around the size of the home, being connected to that limitation of the size of the structure and the size of the lot. And when we take all the other properties on this block of Toledo that are within the city limits, you find that generally the size limitation, if somebody wanted to build a structure of this size, the size of those homes would also prevent them from doing so. You see, you know, plus or minus 3% variation in the difference in the size of the homes. The fourth criteria we consider is whether the applicant put themselves in the situation. And in this case, the applicant did put himself in the situation. The applicant is not responding to an outside act upon his property. This is simply his desire for a larger structure. The fifth criteria that we consider is whether or not the request is in line with the guidance we're given from our comprehensive plan or in the spirit of our code. The accessory structure limitations in the code are meant to be blanketly applicable across the city to every residential property, from our smallest residential lots that are, you know, almost 5,000 square feet in size to our largest, which are over an acre, 2 acres in size in the city limits. And so that 25% requirement is meant to be applicable to all of them and meant to show that across the city, accessory structures are just that, they're accessory, that they are not similar in size or scale or function to the primary structures that they support. In reviewing this request, you know, you can get to a point where you say that a accessory structure that is not 25%, but 36% of the main structure and limited in height and size is still subsidiary to the primary structure. We can also point to some policies in our comprehensive plan that encourage reinvestment, adaptive reuse, and higher utilization of property across the city as established neighborhoods like this grow and change. The sixth criteria is in regards to whether or not the granting of the variance would allow the applicant to reasonably utilize their property. In the case of Mr. Schmidt, you do have kind of a balance of things, which is why we called it a partially complies. On one hand, the subject property can accommodate the full size of the accessory structure that they're entitled to under our standard UDC. But on the other hand, this is a lot, a very, very large lot, where the backyard is nearly a 1/4 acre in size to itself. And plus it opens out onto the airport property, which makes it appear even larger. And so in considering that, you may be able to say, well, on one hand, the applicant is able to completely use their property as they're entitled to, but looking at the size of their property, you may not say they're able to use as much of their property as they ought to. And the last approval criteria is related to what we call insufficient findings. These are things that are just not at all reasons for variance. We did not find that these any of these four conditions on your screen existed in the case of this application. In summary, we did find that staff found that it complied with 3 of the approval criteria, partially complied with 1, and did not comply with the remaining 3. We did go through our standard public notification process. We notified 16 property owners by US mail within the 300-foot buffer. Notice was posted in the Sun News on April 4th, and signs were posted on the property. Staff did receive 1 comment in opposition, which was included in your packet, and 1 comment which Stephanie passed on after the agenda was posted, which was passed on to y'all earlier today by email. So in summary, we are asking you to hold a public hearing and consider action on a zoning variance to allow an 11.5% increase from the 25% size limit on an accessory structure to allow an accessory structure that is 36.5% of the size of the principal structure. Before we go into discussion, just a reminder, when a motion is made, the board must cite each of those 7 criteria. You must read them off, all 7 of them. We must find that complies with all 7. And when the board votes, a supermajority vote is required to approve the variance. Even if the motion is for approval, but you have a simple majority, the variance request would fail and it would be considered denied. So, I'm available for questions, and the applicant is also here if y'all would like to hear from him.
Okay, are there any questions from the board?
This is Kayla McCord. Can we have a supermajority with 4 attendees?
Yes, ma'am. So the supermajority is of the members on the virtual dais voting tonight. So you would need a vote of 3.
Okay, so 3 of 4 would do it. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
John Marler, further explain your number 6 partial. I didn't quite grasp why it was partial.
Oh, Mr. Marler, if I may, I misspoke in answering Ms. McCord's question. Andrea corrected me that it would it's a vote of all of the board members. This is different than planning and zoning. So tonight, to approve the variance, we would have to have a unanimous vote of the 4 on the dais.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure we had that clarified.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I did not hear the beginning of your question.
Okay, I just wanted a little bit more understanding of the utilization partial. How does that work? I mean, go back to that number 6. And the conditions that create the need for the zoning variance of the application to the code to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit, but you're saying not partially. Explain.
So the 25% limit is blanketly applied across the city to homes of all sizes on all different sizes of lots. The code does not anticipate a situation where you have a relatively average size home on such a large piece of property. There are situations today where you see a home of 18 to 2,300 square feet on a 5,500 square foot lot, right? So very different drastic floor to area ratio. And so the applicant has a incredibly large backyard in comparison to other properties you might find in the city. If this 20,
the reason I'm asking that is I drove by the property and it looks to me that where he's located, he's not really causing any difficulties with anybody, but I was intrigued with the possibility that utilization was happening. Then I looked at the other points. Any other discussion from the board on this item? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, if I may, If we go back to continue on with your question, if we go back and look at the 3 size limits that are placed on accessory structures,
Right.
if number 1 did not exist, if number 1 and number 3 did not exist, and we were just looking at how much of the rear yard the structure took up, Mr. Schmidt would be allowed a 2,800 square foot accessory structure.
Right.
It's only the 25% that really limits how much of his rear yard he can use.
Yes, okay. Yeah, that's great clarification, Ethan, I appreciate it. Any other member of the board want to ask Ethan a question? Or does the applicant wish to address the board?
This is Craig Schmidt, if I can speak.
Certainly.
Yeah, so basically, it is an interesting situation as far as what the limitations are. And I completely understand, you don't want big skyscrapers in someone's backyard that dwarfs the original house and what have you. And, when we first moved in, what we had intended to do was add an addition along the existing garage that had basically a side entry to the driveway. And because my lot is on that corner, it pushes, I have a 25-foot build line on each side on the front side. So we couldn't do that. And when we look at adding on, we'd have to do above the garage or what have you. And so we thought, we're looking to add a pool down the road. So, having like a little pool house, guest house. And the biggest reason for the extra size is because, the 400 some square feet is just, it's so small, it would be like a little, just one room. And so we did want to have a little bed area and then be able to have like an entertainment area. So I don't know if that helps my case or doesn't, but that's like the honest truth is what we want to do. And it's a tasteful design and it should be a nice structure.
Mr. Schmidt, if you could address your comments on your letter of intent, why you feel that the 3 items that were marked as non-compliant should not have been marked that way. I read your letter and I would like to address those issues with the board. If you would just tell us on each one, you actually listed all 7 points. So I'd appreciate you going over all 7 points just as Ethan did.
I would love to do that, sir. I'm in a vehicle right now and I don't have that in front of me. So
Okay, could somebody pull up his letter on intent? Ethan, could you do that?
Yes, sir, I certainly can.
Because Mr. Schmidt has obviously thought this out. And if you've been able to drive by the property, I think you can understand his commentary. And I really do want him to want us to understand those terms. So if you wouldn't mind, I will read what Mr. Schmidt wrote, and that'll just be common, in discussion with Ethan. It's not a point to try to put this thing into the discussion for a vote. Mr. Schmidt says under extraordinary conditions, the main condition we are looking at as extraordinary is that the house is on a corner lot, which imposes a 25-foot setback on 2 sides of that property, which limits the size and expansion of the existing structure. The structure we are hoping to build is going to double as a game room and family guest area. So that's his answer to extraordinary. His answer to substantial detriment is in no way will this structure affect any other properties or people in any negative way. That was an approved point. Other properties in the area don't generally apply to the surrounding properties because not all houses in the area have accessory buildings. When we're looking at neighboring properties of our surrounding neighborhood, houses range from 1,500 to 4,500 square feet, on and on and on. But I think if you're looking at your notes in your agenda, applicant's actions, we have not done anything to the property to constitute the need for this variance. In other words, there's nothing required. He believes that this is the property, this is due to the restrictions of the property having street borders on two sides. That's basically his call there, but I'm hoping that you're reading along with me. The comprehensive plan is an okay deal, and then utilization, because of the restrictions of the building setbacks due to the lot dues, we would not be able to properly utilize the space. The word properly is again a biased statement by Mr. Schmidt, but he's the owner, and I think he's entitled to that. And there are not insufficient findings. So I think that if we've all read the material, and if I know Kayla, she's got it printed out. I think that we are now ready to have a motion before the board. And if you'll go down to the end of that, Ethan, where it tells them what we have to do to make a motion, the motion has to address every one of those issues if it is a motion to approve. So
Mr. Chair,
I
excuse
open
me,
the floor to a motion.
Mr. Chair, this is Kayla McCord. We probably need to hold the public hearing.
Yes, ma'am. That was exactly what I was gonna say.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. I appreciate that. So now we're through with Ethan. We're going to have an open meeting, a public meeting for anyone discussing. I noticed that we had some attendees. Has any of the attendee filed a desire to speak?
Yes, sir, you do have a hand raised. Debbie is raising her hand right now to speak.
Okay, then you have 3 minutes, and you can address the board as you choose.
Okay, I have just a couple of questions. One, is this property on septic? Two, has the actual elevation of the property been reviewed for flooding? There is flooding along Toledo Trail. Three, as the areas of Serenata start to see gentrification, what are the tax impacts to the neighboring homes? And four, when a zoning variance is requested in these annexed areas, is the original deed no longer in effect?
And are you through? Those are your comments. I appreciate it. Anybody?
Ma'am, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if we could ask Debbie to give us her name and address for the record.
Oh, she did that, but okay, Debbie, would you give us your full name and your address?
Yes, it's Debbie Dobernacki, and I live at 504 Toledo Trail. And Ethan, if I need to send these questions to you, I'm happy to do so. I'm just curious about these things.
Yes, ma'am. So during the public comment period, the board is encouraged not to address questions from the public directly. But we will put a number in the chat, Debbie, that you can certainly follow up with staff, and we can help go over your questions.
Yeah, the commentary from the attendees is just a commentary. They're not a direct question to the board, and we are not to answer questions to the board. Any other comments from a public meeting? None being heard, I will now state that the public part of our meeting has been closed, and we are now ready to entertain a motion from a member of the board. Hello? Anyone from the board?
Well, this is Ed Whitmore. I guess we need to go ahead and make a motion one way or another to move on. I would move that we grant the variance number one, extraordinary conditions due to the being a corner lot and setbacks. It complies with number two, no substantial detriment. Number three, it sounds to me or looks to me as if it doesn't really affect other properties. The applicant's action, number four, that was not caused by any thing that he did. Maybe if they'd built the house originally bigger, it wouldn't be an issue. Complies with comprehensive plan. It partially complies with utilization, which I'm still, as we talked about, a little unsure how that quite fits, but it does, I think it complies as much as it doesn't comply. Number 7, or insufficient findings, it complies. Therefore, I just make the motion, we go ahead and grant the variance.
Okay, any second? I will second that motion. Discussion. No discussion.
Actually, this is Kayla McCord.
I thought-
Yes, I would really like to support this because this specific situation with a very large rear yard certainly is emphasizes the fact that this creates no detriment to the neighborhood. The problem is that under the 7 criteria we have to work with, the property doesn't really present extraordinary conditions. I don't think setback requirements based on the fact that the lot is on a corner really meets that criterion because it's not inherent to the land itself. I really want to support this, but quite honestly, it does not, these same conditions apply to other property. And that's a big concern for me. Along with the fact that in this case, the applicant simply wants a bigger accessory structure.
Mhm.
And I don't blame him. I would too in his situation. But it is a result of the applicant's actions. And in no way, I guess what I'm concerned about is in this situation, when it clearly doesn't comply with the requirement that it not be a result of the applicant's actions, then it opens the door to setting a precedent where everybody with a large lot can ask for accessory structures bigger than what the UDC allows. And I just think that's a bad precedent to set. So that's where I am. I would very much like to support it, but under the criteria we have to work with, I don't think I can.
John Marler, I tend to agree with the extraordinary conditions. When I looked at the property, I don't think we're going to cause irreparable harm by voting this down. However, the motion before us is to approve, but I would not be into the yay vote on this for the simple reason that the property is very big. There are alternatives, I believe, to the property. And I seconded the motion because we needed to move on it. But I personally, I do not think we have the 3 out of 4 votes necessary for this. So any other discussion? We have Ed and Stephanie to comment, if you wish.
Well, I made the motion, but I do agree that it does create a bit of confusion as to whether this really fits the scenario of whether we should grant it. But again, maybe there's some things within the code that need to be looked at for larger lots and situations, give a little bit more of a, room to work with. I didn't look at the location, but it would be a difficult call to say we should, grant it, given the criteria that we're working with.
Stephanie.
Yeah, unfortunately, I did look at the the lot and the plan. It backs up to the Georgetown Air Force or
Airport.
airport. So I don't think it would cause any problems. However, based on the criteria of the 7 points, it does not meet all those criteria.
Okay, well then I think our discussion is over. I'm going to call for a vote. Those who are in favor of the motion to approve the variance as written, raise your hand. And I'm not seeing, or let's do it on the vote, voice vote. Ed Whitmore,
I would probably vote to approve it.
okay. Marler, no. Kayla,
No.
Stephanie.
No, sir.
Okay, so that's the vote. It has been disapproved and the variance is denied. I think we're at the end of our agenda. You want to make any comments from staff? No comments from staff. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I
Okay,
move we adjourn.
move to adjourn.
Okay, we've got the motion and second. Goodbye. Thank you, men and women. I appreciate you so much that we had a